Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a quick spin around all the biggest headlines in mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and I've assembled some of the sharpest minds to tackle 5 topics. We got Danny Segura repping Sofa. He's a 305 gangster, no doubt. Matt Wells out in the Big D. Jerry Jones, Mark Cuban, they consult him before making big moves. And, of course, Beantown Nolan King. Journo during the week, but I heard he's a shot caller on weekends. Cold Coffee, of course, behind the scenes, man, and the ones and twos making us all look good. All right, fellas, let's get to it. As you know, Sean Strickland this past weekend defeated Jack Hermansson on Saturday night to not just 6 straight win and get him closer to title contention. His popularity has grown as he trudges the boundary lines of fight promotion, pre-fight, and discussion of his performances post-fight. What are your concerns, if any, going forward? Danny, 4 minutes on the clock. You lead off.
Yeah, Sean Strickland has become a very interesting character, but I think outside of the stuff that he says, he also needs to worry about his in-cage performances as well. I think, look, he had a great fight. I think he picked up, obviously, a very important win, defeating someone like Jack Hermansson, but at the same time, he didn't have a type of fight that wowed the fans, that kind of promised that there was going to be a lot more. It was kind of like he did the bare minimum to win, which again is still impressive because it looks like he didn't try a whole lot against Strickland. But at some point that might have to change if you want to campaign for the title. And as far as the trash talk, I don't know how I feel about some things. Like certainly he's navigating a very thin line of trash talk, and he gets into like some weird territories, and some of the things that he says could be found offensive by many. But again, this is mixed martial arts. I've heard and seen worse. I don't know how much people, like fans, really are going to care as long as he gives, good performances. But what I do think is if he wants to cater to the masses and eventually, be a crossover and sort of reach his full potential as far as star power goes, he is going to have to clean up a little bit. I think he posted a tweet that he got an email from somewhere. He did an interview, like not MMA media outlet, just like a regular outlet ahead of his fight against Jack Hermansson. They're like, yeah, sorry, we're not going to be able to use like half of this interview. Obviously, as expected. So certainly, I think he should clean up a little bit his trash talk. I think there is room for to keep that wild man Strickland there. But I think all in all, it's probably better to tighten some things up on that end.
All right, I love it. Matt, how much does he need to tighten up? How much of this line has he already crossed? What would you advise this young cat?
I mean, he's crossed plenty of lines, right? He's crossed plenty of them, and I mean, admittedly so, right? He knows what he says and does is not PC by any means, but like as Danny said, when you are in the self-promotion game, you need to watch what you say at times. You need to be able to have outlets use your interviews. Like, yeah, it's funny to throw that tweet out there and be like, hey, they couldn't use my interview because I'm just so off the rails. I'm so edgy with everything I say. Like, nah, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot at the end of the day when you do that kind of stuff. People crap on Colby Covington for doing his shtick and his gimmick, but you can use his interviews as offensive as they may be. At least he knows the line not to cross to where people can still use it in an interview, still write an article, still create things. So he needs to reel it in a little bit. Actually, he needs to reel it in a lot, especially considering, like Danny said as well, the performances, yeah, they're technically sound. They're very pleasing to watch from a technical standpoint if you're into that sort of thing. I personally love a crisp left jab with, slick defense on the other end as well, which is what he displayed on Saturday. But at the end of the day, if you're not finishing people, people are going to lose interest. And that's just the reality of it. No matter what you say on the mic, people want to see finishes. They want to see explosive performances. And we're just not getting that from him right now. We are getting technically sound things, but the performances at the end of the day with the trash talk has to match up with what happens inside the cage.
All right, Nolan, let's squeeze you in real quick. 6 straight, but the spotlight's getting bigger. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Matt says. And just to add something, Ariel Helwani actually did an interview on Spotify with Tim Simpson, who's Sean Strickland's manager. And he was saying that the UFC did kind of tell him that he probably wants to tone it down if he wants big opportunities. And, that sponsors had kind of said that they weren't able to sponsor him. So really, I think Sean's kind of the only person he's really hurting with this, the person he's hurting the most is himself. So I don't think that that's necessarily a smart move.
All right, we've gotten a response from the promotion. The management seems to hopefully be on top of it. We'll see going forward because the fights are just going to get bigger, and so is the spotlight, like I mentioned before. All right, guys, second topic here. The next season of The Ultimate Fighter, it drops in May, and the UFC officially named Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes as coaches. They'll oversee a crop of heavyweights and women's flyweights for this season. My question's here: did the UFC pick the perfect combo to lead these up-and-comers? This rivalry sure to heat up. 1 to 10, how fired up are you? All right, we'll put 4 minutes on the clock. Matt, lead off.
When I saw that they were announced for it, I was kind of disappointed. But at the same time, like, we've seen so many rematches and title fights, like, immediately. Like, we just came off a trilogy with Davison and Brandon Moreno. So letting this thing kind of breathe a little bit is fine by me. They're about to start filming, so it's not like we're gonna have to wait super long for them to get in the cage potentially anyways. They could still hop in there in the summertime. I'm not mad at the matchup of coaches, that is, because at the end of the day, for me, when I think about coaching rivalries and tough, it's more about the actual fighters that are on the show that are competing to win. Like, that's what I end up remembering more than anything. Like, yeah, there's some seasons that stand out for me, like Rampage and Rashad. Like, I remember the coaches from those seasons. I remember the characters more at the end of the day, the fighters, the ones that are actually in there trying to earn that UFC contract. Will it be the most exciting season ever? I don't know. Probably not. But again, like, I'm looking to see what these heavyweights and these women's flyweights do more than anything. There's some interesting characters on there. So, Kamaru's brother, let's see what he can do. We got an old UFC vet coming back that hasn't fought in the UFC in, like 12 years. So that's going to be kind of crazy. I'm more interested in what the fighters are going to do more so than the coaches on this season.
Good points. Yeah, I mean, this thing it's not like we're going to have to extend having to watch part 2 of the fight. I think that's important. Nolan, how do you feel about this pairing? And, of course, are you fired up like you have been for other seasons?
Yeah, it's tough, right? No pun intended, but it is difficult. Everything's relative when it comes to the Ultimate Fighter. I definitely think that the buzz of yesteryear is no longer existent. I was a little bit excited for last season, just seeing, hey, we haven't seen this for a few years. Let's see what it's all about. Let's see what they do differently, new twists and turns. And it was just essentially the same product. And I did watch probably about the first half of the season. And then after that, it was just kind of like, oh, let me check who won. Let me check the highlights. Let me see the finish at the end of the episode, that sort of thing. So I will say that I think this season's talent pool is a lot better. I think that heavyweights, there's some guys on there that are thought very highly of, like they would be people that the UFC would put on Contender Series as people that they would really push. So I think the talent pool's decent. It's weird. Like Matt said, there's some outliers. I think it's interesting. I was surprised that the people were dumping on the coaches as much. I think with Ortega and Volkanovski last season, it was kind of like, well, that's, a great fight, but it's kind of random. Like, we don't really know if there's a rivalry or not. With Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes, I mean, there is a storyline there. Obviously, I don't think they like each other a ton. There were some comments after the fight by Juliana that seemed to be interpreted in multiple ways. And I know Amanda seemed to post something that she took exception. So there's already, a number of different storylines coming into the season. We'll see how they do. We'll see how it comes across on screen. But like Matt said, it should, in this day and age, I think reality TV is kind of faded away, and it's really just about the fights for me.
You're so right, man. Those comments are going to come up. Things are going to get spicy, and not just because it involves a Latina. But speaking of Latinos, Danny Segura, wrap this up, man. What are your thoughts?
See, I'm a little different than Nolan and Matt. I kind of like the reality TV trash and sort of drama and all that. Now, of course, I'm interested in the fighters. I think there's very interesting cats in the house, and I'm looking forward to the fights. But I do like the rivalry, man. I really do enjoy it. I do like the trash talk. I think the Ultimate Fighter, not only is it a great way to bring somebody into the UFC and sort of highlight somebody's journey and reveal more about the fighters and their stories, but it's also a great way to promote a fight. I think ideally this Ultimate Fighter would have been best with Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. That would have been the perfect fight. How the UFC didn't make this fight, I have no idea, but they dropped the ball pretty bad there. I think this was tailor-made to revive the brand of the Ultimate Fighter, plus build up a huge fight that for the first time in a while, it's a money fight that doesn't involve the Diaz brothers or Conor McGregor. So I think they dropped the ball in terms of that, but Nunes versus Pena is a solid B option. I do think, you know, if you're not keeping in mind Masvidal and Covington, I do think this is the second best option. So I'm looking forward to it. I'll definitely tune in. I'm looking forward to the rivalry between Nunes and Pena. And like I said, there's also some good fighters there that are worth watching. So I'm excited for it.
I'm excited too. You're right, man. Masvidal Covington would have been something else, not just on the UFC campus, but in Vegas. You just know their paths would have crossed. And by the way, I got this yellow card for anyone that goes over, so be mindful of that, folks. Going down here with question number 3 coming up. Chad Mendes, man. How about this guy, the former UFC featherweight, coming out of retirement to fight at Bare Knuckle FC? He says he stands to make more fighting in bare knuckle than Francis Ngannou's $600K disclosed pay for his latest title defense at UFC 270. Did that statement surprise you guys? Are BKFC and EAGLE FC, who had a nice, you know, debut a few weeks ago, are they just as good as options now as Bellator and PFL and One Championship for combat sports athletes? Yay, nay, discuss the pros and cons. Nolan, you're leading off.
Yeah, it's really tough to tell. I mean, especially when you discuss fighter pay, you know, Chad Mendes saying something like, oh, I'm getting paid more than Francis made in this fight. You know, is Chad talking about his whole contract? Is he talking about that one fight? Is he talking about the disclosed pay? Is he talking about, you know, some other stuff like the pay-per-view points that I'm sure Francis got from that title defense? So pay is a really complicated issue. I'm not necessarily sure, you know, what he was referring to with that figure. Maybe he can elaborate in future interviews. I'm sure somebody will bring it up with him. But I will say, from everything I hear behind the scenes, BKFC, EAGLE FC, they're really good, viable options for these fighters. I mean, there's a lot of fighters that, you know, maybe the UFC doesn't see much promise in the future, but they're still really decent, you know, good fighters that can fight at a high level. And the homes out there are pretty limited. I mean, Bellator only takes on, you know, a handful of guys that kind of part ways with the UFC. And it seems kind of sporadic and random at times of who they pick and choose out of that pack. So to give these seasoned veterans, guys like, you know, like a John Dodson or guys like a David Rickles from Bellator, or, you know, Mike Perry, like give them a good opportunity to get paid. From all accounts, it seems like, you know, they're paying, you know, pretty decently. I think Eagle is kind of on par with, you know, around like what the starting pay would be for the UFC for their kind of prelim sort of fighters. And then it works up there. So that's pretty legitimate. And then BKFC, I know there's a lot of people that are suspicious, like how are they, you know, paying these guys, but they are paying them good and the checks are clearing. So the more opportunities for the sport, I think we're just better off across the board.
Yeah, you know, when they brought on Paulie Malignaggi a few years ago, I thought, okay, they got to be writing some big checks, but more fighters keep confirming it. Danny, you've been at these shows, man. Is it really popping out there? And do you feel like the demand is also there to, you know, for people to be purchasing from home?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I think right now this is the best time to be a free agent if you're a fighter. Years ago, maybe there weren't that many options. It was either, you know, you finished out your UFC career and made a big name and maybe you can go to Bellator. But now you got the PFL, which a lot of people just think, hey, look, you fight and you win and you have the chance to, you know, make $1 million at the end. But there's a lot of fighters that are making, you know, a lot of money and getting close to millions, if not surpassing millions before they even get to the finals. So, yeah, you add on BKFC, who I also hear that is paying very well. EAGLE FC, I talked to a few fighters there at EAGLE FC 44 in their US debut. A lot of fighters seem content with what they were making and what EAGLE FC was paying out. So there are a lot of good options, man. And I think this is great for the industry. Now, how sustainable it is, I guess we'll find out right over the years. Dana White and the UFC, you know, they've obviously been criticized for fighters' pay, but something you can't take away from them is their longevity in the game, while you see, you know, promotions come and go and obviously money dictating that for the most part. So we'll see what happens with these promotions, but certainly you can't deny the fact that free agency right now, it's the best it's ever looked, and there's so many options for fighters. It's not just UFC and Bellator. There are plenty of things out there for fighters to do and still make a good buck.
Options are good. All right, Matt Wells, what's your take? And is this honestly the best time to be a free agent nowadays? Should people just run out their contracts?
Yes, people should allow their contracts to come close to the end, if not outright expire, because like you guys have said, there's so many options out there where promotions are willing to pay top dollar for big names. So as long as you've established yourself as one of those names that deserve that money, yeah, you should see what options are out there available to you. The biggest concern for me, though, is that we still have this huge lack of transparency when it comes to fighter pay in MMA. right? We have no idea what people are truly making. Francis disclosed $600,000. How much did he make after pay-per-view points? We don't know. These are things that we do know in other sports. So if fighters want to help themselves more, they need to find a way to make these things more transparent so that everyone can know what everyone's getting and get their fair share of the pie at the end of the day. So, hey, you guys really got to come together at some point and figure this whole thing out.
Couldn't agree more. Bidding wars are good. It happens in other sports, and that's why that pay goes up. All right, folks, let's go on to question number 4 here. John Jones, he is of the opinion that the heavyweight GOAT, Stipe Miocic, according to him, and the light heavyweight GOAT, him, according to most of us, should tangle for the UFC heavyweight interim title, while undisputed champion Francis Ngannou recovers from that knee surgery that's expected to take him out for the next 9 months out of competition. So does this make sense for all the parties, Jones, Miocic, UFC, and the UFC's heavyweight division, the health of it? Danny Segura, back to you, man, leading off.
Yeah, I'm all for it. This is obviously a little bit of news, right? The fact that John Jones is actually saying out there and giving a name, saying Stipe Miocic, and looks like he's angling a return. He was a little bit quiet maybe a few months back, but I hope this does happen, because look, Francis Ngannou has to recover from a knee injury. That seems to be fairly serious, and obviously it's going to take some time. Plus, John Jones has been sitting on the sidelines for quite some time. He's turning 35 this summer. I think that it'd be a complete shame if he doesn't return to the UFC, given his status not only in the UFC today, but just in the history of the sport of mixed martial arts. And Stipe Miocic has also been waiting around, and I do think a lot of people criticize him and don't give him enough respect, because he really is one of the greats. And a lot of people just think a lot of his wins are fluke, or maybe, you know, his title defenses weren't as great as others. But yeah, I think it makes sense. Make Stipe versus John Jones, and then have Ngannou fight him. Of course, if he does resign with the UFC, have Ngannou fight the winner. I'm all for it. Obviously, I think it all depends on the timeline of Ngannou's injury. If it's not that bad, but it seems to be, then maybe you can just do Ngannou versus Jones. That'd be fine as well. But I do think it's all panning out to be that an interim title does make sense for this situation and the health of the division.
All right, Matt Wells, I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. And by the way, man, he's 30. He's turning 35. I remember when he was 23, chasing down a bad guy in New York before he took down Shogun Rua. Holy cow, time flies. Matt Wells?
Yeah, I would like to see John Jones versus Stipe, but also we have another fight coming up this weekend that could, you know, interject a new name into that mix. If Derek Lewis goes out there and makes an impressive performance against Taito Ivasa, he could throw his name in the hat as well. Why not do Derek Lewis against Stipe? Why not do Derek Lewis against John Jones? Derek Lewis is a fan favorite. He's been active. That's a big name. We don't know if Stipe is going to come back and fight anytime soon. Same with John Jones. But we do know Derek Lewis will show up and he will fight, especially after even saying, hey, I don't want to fight in Houston. Well, here he is fighting in Houston this week. So, you know, he's a guy that's going to show up and people will show out to see him fight. So I do agree with the interim title. That is definitely something that needs to happen. And, you know, if it doesn't happen by June, I'll be surprised. So let's go ahead and make that interim title. The combatants, we'll see who really wants to show up for that. But yeah, an interim title is definitely something that needs to happen.
All right, Nolan, is it unanimous? Are you feeling this? Miocic versus Jones, that GOAT versus GOAT kind of made it really interesting for me.
Yeah, I definitely am. You know, I'm not a big scream from the rooftops for an interim belt kind of guy. And if you had asked me 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, you know, if Francis beats Ciryl Gane, will you know, be for an interim title? I would have thought the scenario would be that Francis and the UFC were in, disputes on contract. I'd say, no, like, figure it out. We don't need to throw an interim belt. But this is what an interim belt is for. It's for a champion that's hurt, who cannot defend his title. And if, the timeline that everybody kind of thinks Francis is going to come back for is going to be the reality of the situation, then, yeah, I think that this is the perfect time to put an interim title fight in. And look at the two guys that you have. You have John Jones and Stipe Miocic. I mean, man, that's a fight that deserves some sort of belt, right, in pretty much any universe. So for me, it would obviously bump up. I don't know what kind of deals John or Stipe would be on with the UFC for that fight to begin with, if they'd get pay-per-view points. But I know, traditionally having an interim title will get you pay-per-view points or a bump should you do the unification bout. So it seems like a scenario that actually makes sense for all parties involved. Obviously unfortunate for Francis, but he is injured. So I'm for it. This might be the only time you hear me root for an interim belt, but let's do it.
I'm with you. I hear interim. I'm like, why? But this one made a lot of sense when I saw that tweet. And yeah, Dana White has confirmed that you become an interim champ. You do get a cut of that pay-per-view. All right, folks, let's wrap this up. Turning the page to this weekend now. Israel Adesanya, he defends his undisputed middleweight title versus Robert Whittaker, the guy he took it from. Going into it, does the rematch feel any different for you now this week than how you felt a couple years ago when it went down in that stadium in Melbourne? Will history repeat itself, or should we buckle up for a part 3 down the road at some point? All right, guys, I want to hear it. And still or and new? Matt Wells, lead us off.
You know, as much as I love trilogies and running back title fights over and over and over again, I think this time the rivalry is going to be put to bed. Here at UFC 271, I think Izzy is just going to go out there and get it done again. I think it'll be a little bit of a closer fight. But, you know, despite Robert Whittaker being on a 3-fight win streak since that first fight, Izzy has also gotten better. He moved up and dared to be great against Jan Blachowicz, found out the holes in his wrestling game, went back to work, came back, you know, took care of business against Marvin Vettori. And I think that, you know, the skill gap is still there. It's still going to be present. Like I said, it'll be a little bit closer fight, but I still think Izzy's going to go out there and get it done. And then we're left with more questions about who's really next, who's really going to challenge him. Does he try to go back up again to 205? Who knows what happens after this fight, but I think Izzy's going to go out there and get it done once more.
All right, one vote for Israel Adesanya. And man, Robert Whittaker definitely earned this rematch. I can't wait to see what he has to offer this time. I'm feeling a little bit different. How about you, Nolan?
Yeah, Robert Whittaker did earn this rematch, but now he has Israel Adesanya has 2 votes for him amongst our staff here unofficially. But for me, I guess the big thing is I think that this will be a closer fight. I think Robert Whittaker's definitely improved. I think that it's been pretty clear that he is the at least the second best middleweight in the world. I'll never say never, but I think Israel Adesanya still is kind of a stride above him. You know, I think the first fight was pretty lopsided. I don't know if this one will be that one-sided, but to me, I think it's going to ultimately have the same outcome. I'm kind of leaning towards Israel Adesanya getting it done in the championship rounds. I think Robert Whittaker, like I said, I mean, it's undeniable that he's gotten better. You know, him and Max Holloway, the 2 champions that lost their titles, have reinvented themselves to a certain degree, but I'm just not sure I'm willing to make that jump and say that he'll go out there and you know, put a beating on Israel Adesanya or figure out a way to win, just because I think Israel, you know, his striking, I think is still on another level. I think technique-wise, it's still better. But it's a great fight. I mean, how many times, again, have we seen, you know, anytime that we can see the number 1 and number 2 middleweights in the world kind of consensus fight each other, I'm here for it. Robert did more than enough to get this shot. He's earned it, and now he has an opportunity to prove me wrong.
All right, that's 2 votes for Izzy Styles. Danny Segura, is it going to be unanimous, or do you think Robert Whittaker has something to offer Izzy here in this fight?
This is such a tough question. I'm leaning towards Israel Adesanya, but something inside of me keeps me away from officially making the pick and going all in on Adesanya. Robert Whittaker, man, I think he entered the fight, and we talk about mentality and all this, but I really do think his mind wasn't in the right place the first time he fought Israel Adesanya. I do think he was a little bit out of character, kind of when Ronda Rousey fought Holly Holm. Usually, you know, we see Robert Whittaker be a lot more calm, collected, but that wasn't the case against Adesanya. I do think that this time around, he just seems to have a completely different vibe, a completely different mentality on his fighting career. This is something that he does and very much enjoys. It just seemed back then that it was kind of like a chore. And we also know the championship pressure, man. You defend that belt over and over. You fight the very best over and over. You know, you always have people gunning for you, you know, 24/7 because you're the champion. That's extremely tiring. I do think we're going to get a better version of Robert Whittaker this time around. I do think he has the necessary tools to make a very tough fight and even win it. I think something that Marvin Vettori lacked was a little bit being more polished, more technical when it came to the striking and setting things up. But I do think he found some success pressing Adesanya and using some wrestling. We know that Robert Whittaker has wrestling tools, and look, that striking is really good. So I'm leaning towards Adesanya a little bit, but I just don't want to sleep on Robert Robert Whitaker. Sorry. I do think that an upset is brewing here.
Man, I can't wait. And of course, here at MMA Junkie, we got you locked in all week. Nolan King, Matt Wells will be down there in H-Town, and the whole team, of course, has you covered on Saturday. So check it out. That is it for this week's Spinning Back Clique. We'll catch you all next week with 5 more topics.